Welcome back into the Pittsburgh Sports Now Football Pulse. I'm Nathan Breisinger, joined alongside today by Brentaro Yamane. Talking a little bit high school football, switching gears today, talking some WPIAL football as we get into week 8, switching off from our traditional Pitt football talk. And there's a lot to discuss. Brentaro helps run Cover 3 Athletics, so make sure to go check them out over there. Their podcast as well, anywhere you can find your podcast. But he helps out with our Pittsburgh Sports Now football coverage on Friday nights, along with a handful of others. We got a slate of games to cover this week. Big games as we head into week 8, as conferences are finalizing the top couple of teams, playoffs. Teams are clinching playoff spots as well. And our schedule goes as follows for this week. I'll be at Montour as Montour takes on Aliquippa. Brentaro is going to see USC, one of the top teams in 5A, take on Moon. Our guy Adam Borst will be covering Bethel Park in South Fayette, another Allegheny 6 matchup as well. And then Griffin Floyd will be in 6A covering Central Catholic versus Seneca. But before we get into some of those games that we're covering this week, we got to head back and talk about some of the games from last week real briefly. And especially one of the biggest games of the week was in Class A. Brentaro, you were there. Fort Cherry, Bishop Canevin. What was your, initial reactions from that one?
I'm gonna tell you what right now, Nathan. I thought it was the best game I've been at all year. I think with the idea that it was two small schools, like the atmosphere, it felt like maybe a 3A, 4A type atmosphere. It was just really a good game. It was a lot of back and forth. I mean, the final score was 49-34, and people might think, oh yeah, Fort Cherry won by 2 possessions. They're probably up by 2 possessions, probably for the majority of the game. No, it was close throughout the whole time. Bishop Canevin had a lead going into the fourth quarter, but Matt Sieg and Fort Cherry, they just ran away with it at the end. Turnovers were really key. I mean, I think Cole Shesky's interception that he threw in the fourth quarter really did change the momentum of the game, helped Fort Cherry a lot. But it was impressive though for Fort Cherry. They didn't have one of their top receivers. Last name's Wood. I forget. I think his name's Braden Wood. I can't remember off the top of my head. But he didn't play in that game at all. But people like Cornally too also stepped up big. And I think the biggest thing that I learned too is Matt Sieg is really like that. I think he's really athletic. I think that just simply, I mean, he knew that this was the biggest game of their season. I mean, no disrespect to like Monessen or some of the other schools in their conference though, but it was the biggest game. I mean, it was on TV. I mean, you had a Steelers player there. It was the Steelers showcase game. I mean, a lot of photographers were there too. I mean, just the idea that it was on TV. I mean, so for some student athletes, that might be like a big shock to them, though. But for him, I mean, he's gotten so used to it now, with it being his third year playing high school football and everything like that. I mean, for Fort Cherry, it was a good win. It was definitely a good win. I mean, they really won the conference with that in that game. I think that once the regular season ends, the WPIAL committee is going to have to decide whether you give the 1 seed to Clareton or Fort Cherry, and you can make arguments on either can make claims on why either team should be the number 1 seed though. But for Fort Cherry, it was a big win. This is the third time that they beat them in 2 years. I mean, especially with the idea that Fort Cherry's never really had to play Bishop Canevin at their house throughout the past 3 years, because the regular season game last year was at Dormont. Last year's playoff game was at South Fayette, and then they went back to Dormont last week. So with the idea that Fort Cherry never really has had to beat them at home, and knowing that they're the underdogs, in the idea that these 3 games that most of the fans in attendance, I think arguably, maybe besides the playoff game that was 50-50 though, but the 2 regular season games were all Bishop Canevin fans. It was a good game all around. I was happy that Alan said like, hey, could you cover this game specifically? And while not that many people might like small schools there, are covering small schools there, I mean, I do, and that was just a good game to cover. So
I saw Fort Cherry in the state playoffs last year when I was doing some coverage for the Trib. And I mean, yeah, Matt Sig is just one of those guys you have to get out to see. I mean, he's a junior now. He's a 4-star player, one of the top players in the state of Pennsylvania. And that 2026 class has offers from all over the place. Penn State, Pitt, West Virginia, just pulled him a couple from Vanderbilt. Virginia has one from USC all the way out in California. So this guy, he's well known around the country in terms of recruiting circles, but in terms of the WPIAL, I mean, he's one of the top players. And Fort Cherry clinching a playoff spot, one of a couple teams in Class A. Neshannock clinching has already clinched a playoff spot. Jefferson, Morgan, and California, both in that Tri-County South Conference, have clinched with 5-0 records within their respective conference. Clairton, another team, you talked about, they're 8-0, 5-0 in conference. They've allowed 1.7 points per game, 7 points all season allowed. I saw them the first week. They took on Steel Valley at that KDK kickoff classic, and even then they were clicking defensively, especially. I mean, you just have guys up and down that roster that can make plays. So Clairton and Fort Cherry, two of the teams really to watch out for in Class A.
Yeah, with Claritin, I mean, yeah. I was just gonna bring that up too. The idea their first touchdown that they gave up defensively was against Leechburg was crazy. First of all, credit Leechburg for scoring against them, but not that many people know that, like as you said, Nathan, when uh the first points that Clarendon allowed this year, they gave that up on offense because of a fumble that was returned by Donald Barksdale. So the idea that Clarendon had consecutive shutouts, like that's just impressive. I mean, especially the way they're doing it too, specifically with all the guys that they have, like Zamir Corral, um, Jeff Thompson as their quarterback, the one freshman, Brandon. Is it, why can't I
Murphy,
not think of Brandon Murphy? Yeah, him too. And I mean, they got some other guys as well. But
Dante Wright, another guy. Yeah.
just with the idea that specifically that they've been doing all this specifically with the fact that their stadium's getting renovated and at the midway mark of the season, maybe it was a game or a game after the midway mark, they're playing all their home games now at Thomas Jefferson with the fact that their stadium Neil Brown Stadium is getting renovated though. So the idea that they're able to have so much success, be arguably one of the top two teams in 1A, I mean it's pretty impressive. And for Murphy, I mean he's gotten Syracuse offer. I don't know if he has any others. Nathan, you would probably know that better than me since he has gone into high school though. But the idea that he already got a Power Five before even playing it down and doing what he's been doing as well, I mean it's been pretty impressive. I mean it's been a while since Clarendon's won a WPIAL title. I mean since like 2020, I would say. I mean, to some that might not be a long time ago, but for others, no, I take that back. It wasn't 2020. It was 2019 when they beat Star Rocks. They played in the 2020 game against Jeanette. But yeah, it's been a while. I mean, for them, I mean, for 5 years has been too long, and I think for them, I mean, they just really wanted this year, and I think that they know they're not gonna have a tough task either, especially if they have to see Monessen, a team that they're rivals. I mean, you could go back all the way in the 1900s. I mean, it's a rivalry, and Fort Cherry and Bishop Cannon will also have to be hard. We'll see how the committee ranks everybody. I mean, I guess you also got to count Neshannock too at times as well. But yeah, Clarendon's been having a historic season, and especially it would be really special for them, Nathan, especially if they somehow win a WPIAL title, go on to maybe win a state title or even play in the state title game, knowing that the next season after that their stadium's going to be ready, like that would just be a special opening. But I think I'm just thinking way too far ahead now. But Clarendon, yes, historic season so far, no doubt.
Yeah, they've been one of the more fun teams to watch. We've covered them over at Pittsburgh Sports Now a handful of times. I believe Adam Borst had a game not too long ago. I think the final game at Neil Brown Stadium before going under renovation and going to be renamed after the one and only Tyler Boyd, which is awesome, fantastic to hear that. I mean, he's still playing in the NFL and he's got a high school stadium named after him. But moving along, Class 2A, I had Steel Valley and Olsh last week, a game that I sort of picked up earlier on in the season, thinking that one would be a real tough game. And Steel Valley, man, they're just coming on at the right time. The runner-up team in the Class 2A last year, losing to Beaver Falls, a 10 seed, came out of nowhere. I mean, Beaver Falls a strong program, but to come in as a 10 seed, a double-digit seed, and win, that was big for them. But Steel Valley, the Barksdale brothers, I mean, those two are one of the better one-two punches and all of the WPIAL, combined for 6 touchdowns against Olsh. Had a run basically opposite of Van Cavels on the one side of the line, the D end, Akron commit. But that's really all Olsh has is Cavels at quarterback and at the end, and Steel Valley just found a way just to continue running the ball. And Dayron Barksdale is back fully healthy, basically missed the entire 2023 season. So he is a big addition. He's playing under center at quarterback, but basically they run the ball all over the place. And in the last 4 games, They're outscoring teams 186 to 23. So that's a team to watch out for. But the other top team up there in their division, specifically in their conference, South Park, defeating Steel Valley a few weeks ago, 7-0. How about that score? A tight game. Both those teams have offenses that can score too, and it was a tight defensive game. South Park won, and South Park bumping down, moving down from 3A. They're a team to sort of keep an eye on, along with Seton LaSalle and that 2A classification.
Yeah, I mean, 2A, it's pretty competitive. I think yeah, Steel Valley, I think losing two of their first three games, I think really woke them up. I mean, lost to Clarendon in a big game. I mean, they haven't what was it like we were talking about this on the sideline, I think at one point during the game. It was like was it like the first time in like how long had they played?
I think that was the first time ever.
I think the first time
I'll have to
ever.
go for because
Well,
they've scrimmaged a ton, and for them being in the Mon Valley area, both of those teams in both historic programs, it was shocking to us that they had only played either one other time, maybe other than that. Here, let me pull that up. Go ahead, Brentera, continue what you were saying.
yeah, but yeah, ever since for Steel Valley losing the big game against Clarendon, which was the KK Kickoff Classic, like a game that many media people were there for, media personnel, excuse me. And just losing to Bishop Canavan, which I was at earlier in the season as well. I mean, they didn't just get beat; they got like humiliated. And that was Duran's first game back too. He didn't play quarterback; he was more of like a receiver in that game. But yeah, the idea that Bishop Canavan shut Donald Barksdale down, excuse me, pretty impressive as well. And then ever since then, I mean, they've gone better. I mean, the game against South Park, which they lost 7-0. I mean, South Park is a good team, as you talked about, Nate. I do think that, but they have gone better. But I also do think that South Park and St. LaSalle are two of the best teams in 2A. I wouldn't be surprised if both teams make it to the WPIAL final. I think what St. LaSalle is doing right now is like remarkable. I think it's crazy what they're doing. I think if you think about what they were at 2 years ago, winning one game, maybe even yeah, maybe not even winning a game. I think they didn't win more than one game in 2022. That's something you might have to fact check me as well. But then last year, I mean, they go 5-5. I mean, didn't make playoffs because their conference record wasn't good enough. And now you see what they're doing now. I mean, but it helps a lot with the idea that Khalil Taylor's just such a beast of an athlete. Scored five quarter touchdowns against Shadyside Academy. And it's not just him. I mean, they have other guys too that are making a name for themselves. You got like Kia Jones and Nelson Coleman and Richard Littlejohn and Mike Pasterik, who's also their quarterback, also a really good lacrosse player too. He's gotten a couple offers for lacrosse. Aaron Loritz that they got from North Hills. I mean, yes, they're getting transfers in though, but it's just the idea that people are wanting to go play at St. LaSalle, and like Khalil Taylor is like the face of that. It's pretty impressive as a sophomore because I remember Khalil Taylor like in eighth grade, and people were wondering where's he going to go to high school. I talked to his uncle, Rushawn Roberts, not too long ago on a podcast as well, and he was telling me how Khalil was thinking about Central Catholic at the time too, but then at the something happened or whatever involving like just didn't things didn't work out, and he went to St. LaSalle. And now they're having what they're hoping to be a historic run going into the playoffs. I mean, Seton LaSalle's good. South Park also really good as well. Eric Daruve became the second all-time leading rusher for South Park earlier this year. I mean, they just have a bunch of guys too that I just think like they're seniors, juniors, like they're just like ready to win. I think them dropping in class maybe helped a little bit too. But I think that might have motivated them too with the idea that, hey, like there's a bunch of big schools around them, Nathan. You think about Baldwin, TJ, Bethel Park, USC, all really not far of a drive for South Park, even Ringgold. Ringgold's a 4A school too. So just the idea that they seem so small around all these schools, no one really pays attention to them even though people probably more people should, especially because they're named after a TV show. But I'm just going off topic there. But anyway, just South Park going down in classification. I mean, you probably don't probably isn't really a good thing because it could be like you don't have as many players or your enrollment's going down, or maybe something involving like um a win-loss percentage maybe. It's just factors that you think about that. But the idea that they're going down into a competing, I mean, it's pretty impressive. I mean, their last two games, they already beat the toughest teams. They beat South Allegheny, Steel Valley, Olsh, and like they got to play like two. I don't want to say scrub teams, but like two teams that like South Park should like really take advantage over the next 2 weeks. So they should have the conference there. I mean, yeah, those are the three teams that I'm really keeping my eye on. And I liked what you said about Olsh. I mean, they have like Cables and like they have like Ethan Davis. I just wish like I don't know. I thought they would be more competitive against that Steel Valley game, especially when I learned uh prior that you were covering that game. I was like, I hope Olsh puts up a fight, but it just didn't happen. But either way, I think Steel Valley, Seton LaSalle, South Park are top three. There's some other schools that we can discuss too, though, but those are the three that like that I've been paying attention a lot throughout this year, as they should.
And Seton LaSalle just has so many playmakers that you listed. But another team also in that 2A classification, Elwood City, off to an unbelievable start, 5-0, 7-0 overall under Dan Bradley, who continues to just resurrect programs. An Elwood City team that just hasn't been good in the past couple of years, but they're knocking on the door. They're going to be another competitive team in that 2A classification. But moving on to 3A, Amani Christian Academy, one of the top teams in that classification, continues to just roll. I mean, they talk about playmakers there. They just have them all up and down the lineup. Gabriel Jenkins, David Davis, Will Gorman on the line. Um, Deshaun Burnett, the Penn State commit, just they continue to run up teams. But key game looking into this classification this week in 3A between Southmoreland and Elizabeth Forward in the Interstate Conference. I mean, that's going to be one basically for the conference title. Southmoreland and EF both 3-0. Southmoreland 7-1 behind freshman quarterback Anthony Smith, who's been unreal for them this year. Has 1,175 passing yards, 21 touchdowns, which is a school record there. In Southmoreland, vying for their first conference title since 1979. It's been a long time coming, and it's going to be a key battle against Elizabeth Ford.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, Southmoreland has taken some big steps. I mean, you think about last year when they played Deer Lakes in the playoffs. I mean, Deer Lakes or Southmoreland, whoever won that game was going to win their first playoff game in school history. Deer Lakes got the better end of that deal. But the idea that for Southmoreland that you think like, okay, like we made the playoffs and then we didn't make it. Can we actually get better? And yes, they did, especially with Anthony Smith coming in as quarterback, a freshman. I mean, especially with the idea that they're in 3A and it's not a small class 3A. It's not as big as maybe 4A or 5A. But it still gets a lot of attention specifically just because the idea that they're bigger than 1A and 2A. But you just think about like what they've done. I mean, I look at their schedule. I have that pulled up actually right now. I mean, they've really taken care of business. I mean, the only game they really struggled was against Blackhawk, a non-conference game that they played at home. I mean, I don't think Blackhawk's really that good, but I mean, credit to Blackhawk for going into Southmoreland and again, in my opinion, it was still an upset win. But they took care of business against Valley, East Day, Laurel Highlands, Ringgold, Derry, York, and at that time, I think Mount Pleasant was the hardest team that they played. I mean, you can argue that their next game against Elizabeth Ford should be the hardest game of their season. But just the idea that Southmoreland and being led by a freshman quarterback to go in Mount Pleasant and Mount Pleasant, they're never a tough out. Mount Pleasant's always tough, and the idea that they held them just to 7 points, phenomenal. I think like for Southmoreland, they're going to be on the rise. Like even if I mean, yeah, they might win the conference this week too. So it's just like with that, it's just like the sky's the limit. Seriously, for Anthony Smith and Southmoreland. I mean, like I was talking to some other people about this. It's like what Matt Sieg has done at Fort Cherry, putting that school on the map, putting himself on the map. Like, I think Anthony Smith is going to be doing that too. If it's not this year, then next year. I can see him, especially if they win on the road again this week against Elizabeth Ford. Like, watch out for them. But yeah, just everything that Southmoreland has done throughout this past year has been historical. And I want to talk about Elizabeth Ford too, specifically in that game, real quick. Um, the adversity that they've dealt with, I mean, just like losing three of their first four games. I mean, I look at the schedule too. That I mean, losing your first two games on the road, you lost to West Mifflin and Highlands. Like, I looked at that. They lost both those games by 1 point. So it's like their overall record's like 5-3, but it could easily be like 7-1 right now if they just didn't miss. the extra point that Adam covered in the first week. And if they would have stopped Highlands from scoring 53 some points. But it's just with Elizabeth Ford, the idea that they lost their first two and lost three of their first four. I mean, to still bounce back and win their last four games, taking care of business against teams that haven't had much success than them over the past 5+ years, and being Greensburg, Salem, Derry, and York. I mean, Southmoreland's going to be tough. It's probably going to be their tough. I shouldn't even say toughest conference game though, because then they got to go to Mount Pleasant in the final week. But it's just like for Elizabeth Ford, knowing that you lose three of your first four, two of those teams, in my opinion, I don't I don't think will be playoff teams in West Mifflin and Highlands. And yeah, they got upset. They got upset. That's basically what I want to say. Elizabeth Ford got upset, and despite losing to two teams that I don't think will make playoffs, the idea that they've come together, they've bounced back, and they've won four straight. That gives them all the confidence they need to host Southmoreland this weekend and think to themselves, like, okay, past is the past. We've gone wins. We know what we can do. Now we just got to do it against some player and some team that's on the rise as well. I mean, a lot at stake. I mean, it's a pretty good game. I'm surprised not more people are talking about this. Maybe they are in like the south part of the county and then some of Westmoreland County as well. But I think it's gonna be a good game.
Yeah, and I love the point about Anthony Smith comparing him to Matt Sig. I mean, what that kid has done for Fort Cherry. Anthony Smith, I mean, he had a lot of hype coming into this year. I saw him at the 210th camp, looked really good, and he's just taken everything, by stride, and he's been excellent for Southmoreland. And looking elsewhere at the 3A conference, classification, Western Hills Conference, one of the deeper conferences within 3A. You got Avonworth 4-0, 3 or 6-2 overall, and then right behind them, Central Valley, a team that a lot of people expected to come down and kind of roll this conference, but they've had to taken their lumps a little bit. They're 4-4 this year. Jance Henry's been in and out of the lineup, but once they're fully healthy, that could be a dangerous team as well. But Beaver area also behind them with Amari Jackson, one of the better two-way players in the WPIAL as well. But now we're transitioning into our game, probably our game of the week, game within the WPIAL this week in 4A. It's Aliquippa, it's Montour. Brentaro, you and I have both at times this year covered Aliquippa. I saw Aliquippa, unfortunately, in the game that they got shut down due to lightning against Bell Vernon, their home opener this year, but also got to see them in their first loss in quite some time at Penn Hills in a tough defensive battle. And now they're playing Montour, one of the better teams in 4A as well. Last year, Montour's only loss came to Aliquippa in the regular season. So this is just has so much on the line. It's going to be so competitive. It's going to be an excellent matchup. Trey Hopper, who's come in, has been tremendous at quarterback, taking over the reins there at Montour. And then you got a star-studded Aliquippa team that is trying to knock off Montour for the first time this season.
First of all, Nate, I'm gonna tell you on this podcast, and I hope everyone hears. First of all, I'm jealous that you're covering that game this week. I would have loved to have been there. Yeah, no, I mean, Nate, I think for you, I mean, this Aliquippa Montour game, I mean, if I'm you, you should be really excited. There's so many star players. There's so many star players. It's not even funny. And I was talking about this with a couple people too. For Montour, I mean, Aliquippa's had your number for a long time, for a while. But if there's any time that you need to overcome that, it has to be tomorrow. It's not the end of the world if Montour doesn't win this game, but in my opinion, Nathan, like the way Montour's been playing, like they really didn't lose many players from last year. They lost Jake Wolf and that was it. You can argue that Trey Hopper isn't as good of a quarterback as Jake Wolf, or whatever. It doesn't matter to me. But just the idea that everybody else returned. You got Caden Halliger, Caleb Platts, James But first of all, I Montour might have the best trio of wide receivers in the WPIL with Alston,
Absolutely.
Batch, and Bunrich. First of all, that's crazy. And just the idea that Trey Hopper is also just in their grade. I mean, he might have not been throwing dimes to them at the varsity level throughout the past 3 years, but it's like they know each other. They've had classes with each other. They've grown up with each other. Like they've thrown footballs to each other. Maybe not as I said, in like at the varsity level or in games though, but they're so familiar with each other that um the chemistry. the chemistry was there. And I specifically talked to Trey in a podcast episode earlier this year, and he said that the chemistry was there. And it's not just them, it's not just those guys either. It's guys like Marcus Battles too stepping up on defense as well. Their offensive line, I think, has gone a little better, led by Mark Dabrowski. And I think for Montour, I mean, it's good that you're at home in this game. I think this is everything for Montour. This is everything you wanted. I think they expected to be undefeated. You might have argued maybe they would have lost the game going into this Quip game, but they didn't. And for Aliquippa, I mean, you got to think about this. It's like I'm not gonna lie, Nate. Like I think Penn Hills is one of the worst teams that they've had in the past 10 years, in the past decade. They're still good, Penn Hills. Like they'll make playoffs and everything like that, and they have a chance to win against North Hills on this weekend as well. But it's like for Aliquippa, I know they didn't have Tyke. He didn't play against Penn Hills though, but it's the mindset that you got to have of it's like okay, like we didn't have Tyke, but we lost to like one of the worst teams that Penn Hills has had over the past decade. And that's just a lot of respect for the Penn Hills teams that they've had over the past decade. But I don't know. I just like took care of business against Newcastle and Blackhawk. I was there for that West Allegheny game. I thought Aliquippa was going to smoke them. Not like I thought the game was going to be close, but with the idea that Tyke Hayes scored two touchdowns to begin the game, I thought it was going to be like I thought they were just going to cook them. But like it was only 19-7. No team scored either point. No team scored a point in the second half, excuse me. And for Aliquippa, it's like I look at the schedule and their game against Balvernon, I mean, I don't think Balvernon is as good they were a couple years ago. But I look at the rest of the schedule and I'm like, you know what, Montour is going to be the hardest test that they'll have in the regular season. So Montour, if Aliquippa is able to beat them by like 2+ scores, I think Aliquippa will be back on track. I mean, I think they would then get the potential number one seed in 4A. Thomas Jefferson's played really good too. This is just something I think that's just something I think with my heart. We can have another debate on whether if TJ goes undefeated and Aliquippa wins their final two, if TJ or Aliquippa should be the one seed, but that could be a discussion for a later time. But it's gonna be a good game. I mean, think about Senior Brooks too. You think about Larry Moon, first of all, the amount of offers Larry Moon had even before playing as a sophomore, that's insane too. And I know you're going to talk a little bit about that too, probably after I'm done with my spiel. But it's going to be a good game overall. I really think it's going to be for the Parkway Conference. I think if Montour takes care of business against Aliquippa, that they'll take care of business against West Day too. West Day's no scrub at all either. But I think that if Montour beats Aliquippa, that they would never be more excited to play West Day. And I think if Montour loses this week, their game against West Day, they might have a different mindset of like, should we rest some players knowing that we're not kind of getting a 1 or 2 seed or maybe like that? Like, not like rest though, but like not like put it all out on the line like they will like this weekend. So it's gonna be a good game. It's yeah, game of the week, right? I mean, if you got nothing to do, if you like high school football, I mean, if you got no other games to cover or scheduled, like I would go to that, just be on that field, just take in that atmosphere. It's gonna be a lot of people. There's only like one side of the bleachers at that stadium, so it's gonna be packed and loud on one side. So it's gonna be exciting.
It's going to be an excellent game, and Montour again. I mean, this is probably their deepest team they've had. You know, with all the senior presence that they have, this is a team that can make a run for the WPIALs this year, and but they have to go up against an Aliquippa team that just knows how to win. They know how to win games like this, and obviously they lost to Penn Hills earlier in the year, and maybe that was a good thing for them. And but one of the better wide receiver cores in the WPIAL has to go up against one of the best secondaries, one of the best um, defensive back rooms in the entire WPIAL as well. Larry Moon, talk about him. I mean, just one of 4-star players in the 2027 class. You got Khalil Good. You have Harrison Walker. I mean, all those guys, just excellent players. It's going to be a fun matchup and one to watch. So be sure to stay tuned to our coverage over there. But as we move on, I want to talk first about 6A before we get into 5A because 5A is probably one of the deepest conferences in the WPIAL. And but going on to 6A, Central Catholic is a team, that took down North Allegheny a few weeks ago, but a good non-conference matchup this week between North Allegheny and Pine Richland. Little crossover here before the final week of the season. What do you sort of see out of this one between those two teams?
Well, for Pine Richland, I think in this game, I think you got to be kind of careful. You got to make sure no one gets injured. You can even argue that against NA too. Pine Richland 7-0. I I think they're going to be undefeated. I think they're going to be undefeated in the regular season, especially because after NA they got to play Shaler. I mean, I look at this game, Nathan, and I just think to myself like, let's just play football and like have fun and not try to like beat ourselves up because at the end of the day, for both teams, I don't think this game is important at all. I mean, there's a rivalry specifically, especially when they both used to play in 6A, and they've been rivals in every sport. So, I mean, it would be tough just to like say, "Hey, let this go." But like for Pine, I mean, if you're Pine Richland, especially with the idea that they're arguably one of the best teams in 5A too, if you play super hard or like do something unnecessary or like cause a penalty or like commit some type of penalty that gets you suspended. You just got to watch out. You just got to watch out for that. I mean, I wish both teams were in conference, but it's not the case. But I think for North Allegheny, they might actually have to be more careful because 'cause I think no matter what, even Pine loses, I mean they'll beat Shaler next week, in my opinion. I think that's something I think a lot of us can agree on. But for NA, I mean, even after Pine Richland this week, like next week they're gonna have to play against Seneca Valley at home. And I think with that, I mean, NA probably has to be more careful because Seneca Valley is obviously better than Shaler, in my opinion. And especially with the idea in the final game that's going to be for like the 2 and 3 seed in 6A. So with that for NA, you got to be careful. I mean, you just got to be careful. I mean, I hope as a fan, I hope it's a good game, but I I just hope that no team like either player, none of these teams like do something stupid. But I think I know why you brought this up too now that I'm actually talking about all this, Nathan, because we're talking about probably one of the two best kickers in the WPIAL going at it this week in Grant Arguero. Apologize if I mispronounce his last name, and Peter Nataro. So it's going to be a good kicking matchup. I mean, maybe one of their legs is going to help them win this game. They're both definitely Division 1 bound. Peter's committed to Alabama, and Grant, I don't know if he has any offers. He might have an offer from Akron or something. But he's eventually, I think, going to see himself D1 next year as well, just based on how good he is as a kicker too. Especially that game that Adam covered earlier this year against Plum, like 5 field goals, like that's insane. So. Maybe it'll be like maybe this could be a field goal game contest of who makes the most field goals will win this game. But either way, I mean, it's the battle between Wexford and Gibsonia. I mean, it's a rivalry. I mean, will it really probably have a lot of effect on them when both teams are trying to chase a title next month? No, but it's just something I guess for bragging rights. I mean, it's good. I mean, take a break from like the important games. I mean, and just like get back to maybe the fundamentals. I mean, for both teams, I mean, they might have had some struggles and maybe stuff that they want to improve on. And if you want to test that out, maybe this is the game you test it out before Pine Richland truly secures their conference title. Maybe next weekend for NA to see if they get the 2 seed. I mean, that game between Seneca Valley and NA next week, that's a huge one though, especially with the idea that you want to host the playoff game and not like go on the road. So that 2-3 game, that's very important as well. But maybe just battle of the best kickers. Maybe that's a storyline going into that game.
Definitely is, and one of the more under the radar games this week between Pine Richland and North Allegheny, and also in 6A, Central Catholic takes on Seneca Valley. Seneca Valley on an up year. I mean, they've struggled over the past couple years, but 3-1 in conference. They're sitting third. So I mean, if they can pull off an upset bid against Central Catholic, that'd be huge, and that turns in that whole 6A classification into a mess going into the final week of the season. But Central Catholic looking for their first WPIAL title since 2020. I mean, it's been a while since that has happened. So Central Catholic just looking to run away with things here and go into the playoffs. But moving on to arguably the biggest classification, the most exciting classification, and specifically division in the Allegheny Six with Upper St. Clair, Bethel, South Fayette. But real quick, before we get into that, another key game in 5A, Woodland Hills and Franklin Regional will battle it out in the Big East Conference. Woodland Hills has won the last 5 straight games. I mean, they're on a roll right now. They're 4-0 in conference play, 6-2 overall. They've just continued to get better as the season gone on. Cam Walter, Scoop Smith, all those guys there. It's like hear more. I mean, all those guys, and they're putting it together at the right time to make a push in 5A. along with Pine Richland, as we just talked about. But have to talk about the Allegheny Six Conference, a game you're heading to. Upper St. Clair and Moon. Upper St. Clair continues to knock off undefeated teams, Peters Township, South Fayette, and then Bethel Park in a close one, 14-10 last week. And Bethel Park looked like they could be the team to beat in 5A, but right now Upper St. Clair looking really good heading in a matchup against Moon.
St. Clair had the hardest schedule in the whole entire WPIAL. And for those that don't believe me, I'm gonna tell you every team that they beat because it's simply remarkable, right? They beat Mount Lebanon, a school that's bigger than them. They beat Cannon Mac, a school that's bigger than them. They beat Franklin Regional, which is a team that's always going to be in the playoffs, always in the hunt. Hampton was probably like but Hampton's still pretty big, and they've had success like in the past couple years, specifically that 2022 year that I can remember when they had Halserig and Eric Weeks, and I forget what their one quarterback's name is, but he goes to Slippery Rock now. But and then they beat McKeesport, beat Bethel, Peters Township, beat South Fayette. I mean, like USC is just like they're playing out of their minds right now. And I really do think, Nathan, that this like for USC, like I mean, yeah, they'll have the chance to win the conference specifically because even if they lose to Baldwin, they'll have the tiebreaker over Bethel Park or Peters Township, whoever wins that game. And I think, yeah, for USC, section the conference is on the line. I already have the headline going into myself that if USC wins, that they're going to win this conference. But it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. I mean, Moon has competed against Bethel Park. They competed against Peters Township. I really do think there were two plays that Moon's 1 and 2, but you could argue that if two plays might have gone their direction, I'll make the argument right now that they should be 3-0. And for those that are listening that don't know what plays I'm talking about, the one game against Bethel Park, right? It's fourth down, maybe third down, something like that. But Pfeiffer throws a pass to Bruckner, drops it. There's video evidence that he drops his pass, and they wrote it a catch, and then that led to Pfeiffer's QB sneak, QB draw for the go-ahead touchdown, and then Bethel Park would later score a touchdown on the final play because of just a bunch of circus plays and everything like that. Moon just trying to win the game and everything like that, though. But if that play doesn't happen and the refs see that, like, who knows what would have happened? I mean, but that's just part of life. That's just part of football. And then the game against Peters Township. If Moon had a lead going into halftime against Peters Township, and if McCullough didn't have that punt return for a touchdown, I mean, it was in the third quarter, but like that changed the momentum. Peters won that game 23-14. That was it. But it's like if you're Moon, like they're 1-2 in conference, they're 4-3 overall. They have nothing to be disappointed about whatsoever. I mean, they took care of business against a team that they were supposed to beat last week in Baldwin. And USC, I mean, they're no sleeper team either. I mean, they'll probably have the same approach that they did going into Bethel Park and Peters Township. Just the idea that if you're Moon, you would really love to win this game to give you more confidence going into next week when you play your final game against South Fayette at home. But for like I guess what I'm trying to think about is for USC, I think they might need a win. They need a like a big time win. Like because if you think about it, like they beat Bethel Park in the last minute because the game went in touchdown. They beat South Fayette by 10, and then Peters Township, I mean, yeah, 21-7. It wasn't like Dalton kind of carried that, but I think for USC, they gotta like smack a team, like smack a good team, like what Peters Township did last week against South Fed, beating them 38-3. I think USC just needs to like they need to have the mindset of doing something like that. Because either way, I mean, then it's like they'll play Baldwin and then they probably should win. But then if you lose this weekend, and then you really got to pay attention to what does Bethel Park do? What does Peters Township do? Like, will Peters Township beat Baldwin? They probably will. And then you got to pray and wonder if South Fayette's going to give Bethel Park some struggles as well that we might talk about in a bit as well. But Moon's no sleeper. Moon's not a sleeper at all. They got players. They have a lot of juniors. JJ Moyer, Darrell Rivas' kid, Jaden Rivas, making more of an impact this year. And how about Andrew Cross? Andrew Cross, a Penn State baseball commit, really making the most out of his time playing QB. He started last year, and now really getting more playing time and making more plays with his arm this year as well. I mean, this is no sleeper team either. I mean, for Moon, they got to be pretty happy with where they're at. I mean, they've competed in all these conference games so far, and it's unfortunate that they got to go at USC this weekend to play this, but hey, if you want to be better and like have a better chance against South Fayette, I told this I told this to people too, Nathan. I said if Moon loses by 10 points or less or even wins the game, so if it like Moon plus 10 if you like betting odds or anything like that, if Moon is plus 10 in this game, it's a win in my opinion. I mean, USC's undefeated, you're on the road. They have they've had more starters like throughout their high school careers in USC. Nothing to be ashamed about. I mean, that'll give them more confidence going into South Fayette. Now, if Moon wins, I think if Moon wins, I think they could really mess up this bracket in some type of way. Even if they're seeded not as high as they want to be, they could like really wreck that bracket in some type of way. But it's gonna be a good game. I'll give some shout out. I'll give a shout out and show some love to some USC players. Julian Dahlem, you can argue that he's been one of the most valuable players in the league this year. I mean, him and Ethan Hellman. I mean, the connection that they have and the guys they have on the line too, Michael Albert, Nate Stoll, Van Helman too, all a bunch of guys making an impact as well. And Dante Corey too. He's had a breakout year too as one of the team's running backs. I mean, probably started running back. I mean, started against Keysport the game that I saw them at earlier this year and is probably still a starter now. And just the connections that Hellman's had not only with his brother Van and throwing touchdown passes though, but getting Nico DeRazia more involved too. I mean, it's gonna be interesting. I mean, I don't think Moon's gonna get smacked. I think it's gonna be a good game. I think all of USC's conference games have been competitive and been down to the wire. I think it's gonna be like that again as well. It just so happens it's the second to last week of the regular season.
And I think the biggest surprising thing to me, I mean, Upper St. Clair, Bethel Park, Peters Township, three of the top teams in 5A, but Bethel Park, a team currently that scores 45 points per game, second best in the entire district, only scored 10 against Bethel Park or against Upper St. Clair. Upper St. Clair's defense just came up big, and they've done so, I mean, throughout the season, only allowing 10 points per game. So they've been fantastic defensively. But yeah, as we mentioned, Bethel Park will take on South Fayette. Another game we'll have covered with Adam Borst on the ground there. And Bethel Park just trying to, lock up that second seed over Peters Township before they go in, or not necessarily lock it up because they have that big matchup next week. Pretty sure that's a game that I will be at covering between Bethel Park and Peters Township. But this first things first is they need to take down South Fayette, a team that was undefeated until the last 2 weeks, losing a pair of games are and now sitting 1-2 in conference. So that'll be another top game. Tanner Pfeiffer's been unbelievable quarterback, senior, been one of the top passers in the WPIAL, second right now behind Trey Hopper. Javon Moore's been incredible at the running back position, one of the best rushers in the district as well. So that'll be another key game to watch.
Oh, it's a very big key game as well. And for South Fayette, I would love to know how they respond. I would love to because for South Fayette, this is their worst loss of the year. They started 6-0, lost their past two games, as you said, to Peters Township and Upper St. Clair. I look at this. I look at the score, 38-3. Peters Township really manhandled them. The game against USC was close. I told many people that for South Fayette, if you're plus 10 in that game too, which they did, only losing by 10, it's a win. And I think they might have felt pretty good about that, thinking to themselves that they might have a chance against Peters, especially because Peters lost to USC a couple weeks before that. That wasn't the case. But for South Fayette, it's like, how do you respond? Because it's like, these last two games for the Lions, they're very important. I mean, I've had people tell me though that yeah, South Fayette started 6-0, but they could be 6-4 at the end of the season. But if you're South Fed, you gotta play really good ball against a Bethel Park. I mean, you're going into Black Hawk territory, and it's like if you're South Fed, it's like if you lose to Bethel Park, not even like a one possession game. If you lose by maybe like three possessions, maybe like 17 points, that's still three possessions. It's 14, 17 points, something like that. You got to think to yourself for South Fayette, it's like this game against Moon is going to be very important. I think at the end of the day, that game against Moon, I mean, whoever wins that game is going to automatically get in the playoffs. But then the team that loses is probably going to think to themselves like, "Oh my goodness, now we just got to pray that the committee lets us in." So, but with South Fayette, it's like these last two games are brutal. I think their game, like Bethel Park's going to be angry, especially with the idea that everybody And I mean everybody that covers high school football around here knows that Bethel Park has had the best offense, and the idea that USC went into their house and they only scored 10 on them. I don't want to say it's embarrassing, but the expectations were not there at all. And that's something that Bethel Park's got to be angry about. And it could be, you know what, it could be kind of similar to what Peters Township faced um a couple weeks before playing South Fayette. It's like you barely beat Moon. I mean, if McCullough didn't have that punt return, I mean, God knows what would have happened. And you lost to USC on the road, and Dahlem just looked like a better football player than Nolan DeLucia and the rest of the team in that late September game. So it's like for Peters Township, like they really like lay the hammer down on South Fayette. I think Bethel Park, I mean, I expect them to maybe lay the hammer down on them as well, just because the idea that Bethel Park literally just got embarrassed. I mean, it was a big game. I mean, Bethel Park didn't allow all the media in because it was just such a big game. And I think with this now, it's like for South Fayette, it's like you really got to win. And for Bethel Park, it's like you can like it, it's like if you're Bethel Park, if you win this game by one possession, like yeah, I would be scared. I would be so scared going into Peters next week, knowing that, especially that Peters whooped them last year. It's just like this game, I guess the biggest storyline for the South Fayette Bethel Park game, it's how are you going to respond? Because both team for Bethel Park, first loss of the season, South Fayette, worst loss of the season. How do you recover? For Bethel Park, they get the lucky advantage of being at home. For South Fayette, it's like, how do you respond? How do you respond? Because I think next year when Drew Horsky is a senior, their starting quarterback, I think he's going to be really good. And I think South Fayette's going to be making more of a talk and making more of a name themselves for winning that conference. And yes, I realize that DeLucia is also going to be a senior next year, and Hellman will also be a senior too, and Cross will also be a senior too. Like I just named all their starting quarterbacks that are going to be seniors, but they'll like it might even be more competitive than you think next year. But yeah, for both teams, it's just how are you going to respond? Are you gonna think about the past, or are you going to move forward? So it's gonna be it's gonna be a big game. I mean, both these teams, they've seen each other in many sports too, and I think for both teams, I mean, going into because their final game of the season is going to be tough as well. So it's just who's going to have a better mindset going into this game, which will help you going into the final game of the regular season.
And within the 5A classification, it's the top three teams from each conference, along with three wildcard teams. So that's 12 total teams make the playoffs. So it's a big week for those bubble teams. Penn Hills, Plum, Kiski on the bubble as well, along with South Fayette and Moon. So those handful of teams, it's a big week for them. Big last 2 weeks as well if they want to try to convince the committee to get into the playoffs. But a lot of stuff covered throughout this show. Appreciate you, Brentaro, for stepping in, talking some WPIAL football today.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me on. I mean, it's been fun. I can't wait to see what goes on around the Whitfield this weekend.
And be sure to go check out all his media content over at Cover 3 Athletics. And for PittsburghSportsNow.com, again, 4 games being covered this week. I'll be at Montour and Aliquippa, Brentaro at USC Moon, Adam Borst, Bethel Park, and South Fayette, and Griffin Floyd at 6A Central Catholic versus Seneca. We thank you for tuning in to a WPIAL Week 8 preview version of the Pittsburgh Sports Now Football Pulse.